shop, he's sort of got pictures of Hakim from all over the world. He met all sorts of interesting figures. He's kind of been really well known, as a guide, and really interesting guy. So Yusuf kind of followed in his father's footsteps. He doesn't believe everything that Hakim does. And if you're interested in Hakim's theories, there's an author named Stephen Mailer who wrote a book, Land of Osiris, I think it is, and he was Hakim's student. Hakim was the founder of this modern, I guess you'd call it chematology, this theory, chemet being the ancient word for Egypt. And he has a lot of interesting theories, but again, I wouldn't say that Yusuf subscribes to all of them. He has his own theories, he's done his own work. Yusuf's he's a practicing stonemason, so he works with this material. He's a very talented musician as well, works with this material with his hands. He's very well versed in traditional Egyptology, like he knows all of the rules. He can read hieroglyphs. He grew up literally across the street from the Sphinx. In fact, it's still where his family store is. It's in Nazlet El Samam, which is a little village that's right near the entrance, the Sphinx entrance to the Giza Plateau. And the Awen family store is right there, and his balcony up the top, you're looking straight at the Sphinx and the little pyramid complex. It's really cool.
What are some of the theories of that guy came up with?
Hakim?
Yeah.
Hakim has, here we go. Hakim has one of the things I can talk about, he thinks there was acoustical properties to a lot of these sites, that there were, some of these were sound hospitals. In fact, he even ran one for quite a while. And they had, anecdotally at least, very good results. They would take people to these ancient places, into some specific areas that have, resonant properties, and they would, I don't know exactly what they were doing in there, but they had people that recovered from illnesses. And at least anecdotally from what I've heard, it worked. And then as the story goes, as it's been told to me, Zahi Hawass actually shut them down. He stopped them from doing it.
Who was Zahi Hawass again?
Well, Zahi Hawass was the long-term head of the
good
Supreme
man, I'm
Council
good
of
dude, I'm
Antiquities,
good, thanks,
or
bro.
the Department of Antiquities and Tourism, I think it's called now.
Okay.
He's notorious kind of figure he had that debate with Graham Hancock where he kind of lost the cool. He's probably the world's most famous Egyptologist, certainly Egyptian Egyptologist, world famous guy. Written a bunch of books. I talked about him a few times. I've met him a few times. In fact, with the last trip to Egypt, we ran into him like 4 times.
Really?
Yeah. He was just there. He was at.
Is he a nice guy?
He can be a charming guy. I suspect he probably. Look, I don't know him personally. I know he's treated a lot of people very fairly. He's probably been less fair to others. I had no problem with him. I was just on a tour, and this was the Graham Hancock tour where he was supposedly debating him, and we spent a day with him. And I think he's certainly had a history of being quite, in the past, it's strange, he really attacks a few of the alternative authors, Graham. In particular, Robert Bauval, he doesn't like. He's pretty fond of saying that, people are just charlatans trying to make money and they're all pyramidiots and stuff like this. But back in the day, though, he was quite friendly. And in fact, I've seen a picture of like Zahi and John Anthony West and Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock kind of arm in arm at the Sphinx enclosure. And he certainly has enabled some interesting research to happen privately a few times. I had a video about the Sphinx temple that started to get into some of that with, there's an interesting correlation and at least these allegations of connection between him and the Edgar Cayce Foundation. Do you know who Edgar Cayce is? The American prophet. Okay, so this is an interesting story. So Cayce was a prophet, and a lot of people made a lot of money based on his predictions for the stock market back in the day, and he ended up he had these visions and wrote a couple of books, and one of his visions entailed you've probably heard of the Hall of Records, right?
Yes.
This idea. Okay, so a lot of that comes from Cayce. He talks about the fact that there's a Hall of Records in one of the locations. There's 3 of them, I think, and one of them is under the paw of the Sphinx, and then there's another one that's supposedly under, I think it was I mentioned it earlier, it's Mount Nemrut, like the Nemrut tumulus pile, which is an insane sight that I also saw for the first time this year. But so he's that foundation. It's the ARE. I think it's the Association for Research and Enlightenment is essentially the Casey Foundation.
Okay.
And they've kind of been involved in private expeditions to Giza. They've been looking, right? They're trying to satisfy Casey's prediction about the Hall of Records, and they have been essentially digging and looking around at Giza and these other places since like the 1970s. Now, Zahi's very much against anything Atlantis related. He's like, there's no ancient civilization. So in publicly facing, he decries any of that type of thing. But he did also grant like the Casey Foundation like a 5-year permit to do unlimited essentially digging and excavation on the Giza Plateau, including in the Great Pyramid. And so it's on one hand you're sort of decrying all of this anything lost civilization, and then on the other hand you're enabling essentially an organization whose stated goal is to prove out Atlantis and that there was a Hall of Records and everything like that. Not only that, but Edgar Casey's son, Hugh Lynn Casey, he wrote a book, and in that book he claims, and I will say that Zahi Hawass has denied this, he claims that the Edgar Casey Foundation funded his education. Like they paid for his education at Pennsylvania University. They found, like he literally says in the book, and this isn't me saying it, he found that they found Zahi, who was a site inspector at the time, like not like lower rank kind of guy, but he was pliable and agreeable, and they thought he was someone they could work with, so they funded his education along with Mark Lehner, who's been a long-term partner of Zahi Hawass, and that went through the Pennsylvania University. They got him his doctorate, and for sure it's verified, like Zahi has had engagements with the ARE plenty of times. He's gone and spoken at their events, he's been part of it. He goes back there and lectures quite often, so it's just strange to me that he's associated with an organization like the ARE, which has done these secretive digs, and there's strong evidence, as documented by Robert Boval, which might be one of the reasons that Zahi doesn't like him so much. He's documented the fact that Zahi's been enabling kind of secret expeditions, digging and drilling around the Sphinx since the 1970s. Like there's kind of one acknowledged drilling effort that they made to look under the Sphinx. I think it happened in the mid-90s, thereabouts, and they were drilling under the body of the Sphinx. And the stated goal was, we're checking the integrity of the limestone bedrock given the water tables rising, blah, blah, blah. But there's plenty of evidence for a bunch of other drilling that's happened, like as far back as the late 1970s. And there's pictures of Hugh Lynn Casey and Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass from those times, like a young Zahi. They're all together. And then in the mid to late 90s, he enabled something called the Shore Expedition, which was Dr. Joseph Shore, a couple other people, Boris Said was one of them, but they're all ARE members. They're all part of the Casey Foundation, and none of them are Egyptologists or archaeologists, but he gave them a 5-year permit, open permit, to do whatever they wanted up at the Giza Plateau. And they did a bunch of stuff. They did a bunch of excavations around the Sphinx, and Zahi was involved in it, and they even made a documentary that's never been seen. So Boris Said, who was a filmmaker, he's also since died. And I dug into like these old Art Bell radio episodes from the 90s where he was talking about it. He had a falling out with, I think, Joseph Shaw, the guy that was funding the experiment or the expedition. And just based on this fallout, the documentary kind of went into limbo and it's never been seen, but apparently it's part of it, and they had gone in under the Sphinx and looked at chambers. And Zahi at the time, and Boris said they found chambers beneath the Sphinx. Like they 100% found chambers beneath the Sphinx. By the way, also a claim made by John Anthony West and Dr. Robert Schock when they analysed the area with ground penetrating radar. They found chambers beneath the Sphinx. And at the time when they were doing this experiment, Zahi said, we've got this incredible announcement and discovery. It's going to shake up the world's history. We're going to change what we know about the sort of the structure of the Giza Plateau and what's down below the ground. And he was teasing it. And then this documentary kind of went away, and he's never said anything about it since. And in fact, to this day, denies that there's any chambers or any structures or things beneath the Sphinx. If asked, he'll say, well, they found natural fissures in the rock, and there's nothing else, which is nonsense. I mean, Boris Said's on record saying, no, I've seen them. Like he's been down there and seen them.
Been in them?
Well, it's kind of what he says, yeah. But it's very secret. It's all privately organised and permitted by Tahi Watts. And so there's an interesting history. I think if there are chambers down there, and if there's anything in them, or there was, it's long gone. I think it's been pilfered, or it's been taken, or it's not public. I mean, there's also a chance that if there was ever anything in there, the Egyptians or the dynastic Egyptians might have taken it. There's a couple of people with theories along those lines, like Manu Zada wrote a book, I think, called Beneath the Sphinx, that talks about the idea that the Hall of Records may well have been there, but it was discovered by the Old Kingdom Egyptians who took it, and then there's some evidence that they were replicating some of that information and knowledge through a particular cult that persisted through dynastic Egypt. And it's an interesting story that he puts together. It is new data, but it seems likely that they're indicating some really interesting information, like the spacing of planets, the relative distance of planets in the solar system, like all this cosmic information that it seems like they didn't really know what to do with, but it was information that they'd gotten from, this trove of data from a lost ancient civilization. And it's just, they then were replicating it and kind of recording it down in their own way. And there's all these interpretations of this stuff that seems to match all of what we know about the solar system and the structure. So it kind of goes, there's all these different directions that stuff goes in. And I've been meaning to do a more dedicated sort of deep dive into that shore expedition and the history of secret digs around the Sphinx, because, the Sphinx and the Sphinx Temple, it is like, it's described as a gateway. Like, there is a lot of legitimate reasons to think that there's something below that structure in that part of the Giza Plateau. Like, even the way it's historically depicted and talked about from ancient Egypt, like they often, when they draw out the Sphinx, they show it on a pedestal. Like, the Sphinx is always depicted in these steles most of the time on top of a pedestal. And in many of those pedestals, there's a doorway, and then the Sphinx is often described as a doorway or as a guardian, guarding a doorway and into the underworld or something like this. And when you look at the Sphinx, it's obviously sitting on the bedrock, right? But you have to imagine there's a structure in front of it that's next to the Valley Temple's on like the left, looking at the Sphinx. Then there's the Sphinx Temple in front of the Sphinx, and the Sphinx is behind it. Now, the Sphinx Temple has been shut for public access for I don't know how long. Like, Yusuf, he's in his 40s. He's never been in there until we got to go in there on one trip. We were probably one of the first groups to ever, and thanks again to the people I know in Egypt who arranged this through the Ministry of Antiquities to finally open up access to the Sphinx Temple as a special permission. And we went in there. Very interesting structure. Amazing. There's amazing granite cornice blocks and all this stuff. But if you would imagine it back in the day with its cornice blocks, which are these curved blocks that would have been around the edge of it, and you'd looked at it from down in the valley towards the Sphinx, it would have looked as if the Sphinx was sitting on top of the temple, which makes the Sphinx Temple potentially the location for the pedestal of the Sphinx, which has the doorway to the underworld. Now, in the Sphinx Temple, when you go in there is indeed evidence for shafts that go down. There's these giant, there's like an 80-ton channeled granite block in the ground beneath the floor tiles that have since been removed that terminates at a shaft that goes down to we don't know where, that hasn't been cleared, but it obviously goes underground. And not only that, but out the front of the Sphinx Temple, if you walk back, if you're standing there at Giza and you're looking at it, it's where the seats are for the sound and light show. Sort of off in the corner, about 30 or 40 feet in front of the Sphinx Temple, there's a little concrete pad, and there's a metal tube sticking out of it like this, just off the ground, just sort of unobtrusively in the corner. That's where Zahi Hawass himself did a drilling experiment. So they drilled down like 150 feet. This is a limestone plateau. And at like 150 feet or 130, something like this, they hit granite. This drill hit granite and returned these shards and flakes of red granite from 130 feet below the ground. And there's not natural granite there. So what the hell is down there that deep, and it's made of granite? Right?
Whoa.
It goes on and on. Like you go halfway up the causeway, like connects the Sphinx and the Valley Temple to the Middle Pyramid complex, right? It's this big causeway. It goes up to the pyramid. Halfway up it is what's known as the Osiris shaft. Mm-hmm. This is 3 different levels that you can go into. Again, as a special permission, there's water at the bottom. but there's 3 chambers that go down to about 150 feet, and there's big granite boxes in them as you go down there. Right, and there's tunnels that literally lead off down the causeway that have never been explored at the bottom level. They're caved in and stuff, but they've never been explored. There's footage of when they did pump the water out back in the day when they were exploring it, and it was like a Fox, I think it was on the Fox channel, and Zahi was down there with a reporter and saying, oh, this was the tomb of Osiris or whatever, and she's like, well, what about these tunnels? Zahi's like, no, we've never explored them. We sent a boy in and he couldn't get very far, but we've never looked at as to where they go. So, like, there's definitely underground chambers and infrastructure down there, and we honestly don't know if they've been explored and if, you know, there's anything in there or if, you know, what's happened, which is...
What do you think his motivation would be to change his story on that and keep all this secret excavation secret and all this secret exploration and not to change the narrative? Like, what sort of motivations would he have?
I don't know. I mean, if, you know, I think it's the typical, if there's any motivation, it's pure speculation. I'm not claiming this, all that I know. And I'd probably reiterate that Zahi's denied that he has any connection to the area. For sure, he was involved in these expeditions. I mean, there's plenty of people who talk about him being involved in these expeditions. Mm-hmm. And again, all of this happened, like, you know, 30 years ago now. But, yeah, I mean, what motivates people, right? It's money and it's power and it's all these sort of things. I don't know. I don't know. And it's I don't like any real conspiratorial angle on these things in terms of, you know, they find stuff and is it hidden from us because it doesn't conform to the story? I don't know. I'd like to think not. I'd like to think that if they found stuff, they'd talk about it regardless of if it had a significant impact on the story of history. But
well, doesn't he make money quite literally from people visiting Egypt? And
yeah, I mean, he's made plenty of money. I mean, I don't know how directly. He's a very powerful figure in Egypt. I'd say this. He's also done a lot for Egyptology. I mean, he champions the returning of objects to Egypt, which I think is a great cause. Particularly if they're in private hands and people can't see them, the stuff that gets, I mean, Egypt's been pilfered by everybody for so long.
Yeah, you were saying much of the stuff's been found in Israel, right?
Oh, it's all over the place. Yeah, all over the place. There's yeah, I mean, there is stuff that, I mean, you don't have to go back to just Israel, but you go back to the Americans, the French, the English. I mean, during all the periods of occupation, the last several hundred years of anyone who's been involved in the governance of Egypt. I mean, you know, I think Matt Simpson just did a video, Luke Cavins actually did a video talking about how the British Museum is essentially full of artifacts that were stolen from Egypt. I mean, one of the sticking points is that the original Rosetta Stone is in the British Museum. It's been there for like 200 years. But it's, you know, I'm like, if it's in a museum somewhere and people can see it, they have, people don't understand the scope of artifacts that have been found here too. There are warehouses absolutely full of this stuff in Egypt. Like some of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings are, like, they fill them up with all the artifacts they find in other places and lock the doors because it's essentially climate controlled. And I hope, and I've yet to see it, but they're building a giant new museum, which should be just about done by now, the Grand Egyptian Museum. Biggest museum in the world from what I understand it's going to be. And I really hope that they have enough space and real estate to show us all of the artifacts that they just haven't had the space to show. I mean, there's so much stuff in Egypt and that's been taken from Egypt. And even then, even despite all of this, even the Egyptologists, and Zahi will say this as well, is that it's like 70% of it is still underneath the sands. Mm-hmm. Like he thinks that we've only maybe uncovered 20 to 30% of what's out there. So there's a lot going on, and but yeah, look, I don't know. It's an interesting sort of story to dive into with the history of some of these excavations, and like I said, it kind of goes back to my point about the pyramid earlier, where I hope that whatever they do, and I'm sure somebody's planning it, that they're going to go and try and look for this chamber. I would very much hope that it gets shared with the world. That's all. Mm-hmm. It's like, share that information, let everybody see it. I mean, it's part of everybody's history. You know, I don't care who makes money on it or doesn't, but it's just like, I think a lot of people would be interested.
What is this right here?
So this is the obelisk.
Okay.
This is the unfinished obelisk, and you talk about scoop marks. There's a few of them on top of it.
Oh wow!
And in fact, you see some of the the characteristic pounding stones there as well. And in fact, probably better. And there's some of these scoop marks are, you see on the right here, on the left of the thing as well, and then all the way down what do you call it? What's this, man? Why is my brain not working?
Here.
Seriously, need some the trench. There you go.
Okay.
I just needed to look at this one.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so this one was never actually pulled out of the quarry, right? This was started and never completed.
That's right. Yeah, it's not actually. In fact, it's not. The trench isn't quite deep enough. Actually, look at some scoop marks. See them on the right here as well, on the wall. So what's interesting about the scoop marks, and I don't know if I have other examples in this particular.
Is there any explanation, like of how this could happen naturally? Those scoop marks, like from degradation.
It's not natural. It's definitely not natural. It's not degradation. So the explanation for this is that this was the quarrying technique. You see this on the quarries. You see it around the artifacts where they've been quarrying things, and it's not a natural phenomenon. 100%. They say it's been made by these dolerite pounding stones, which honestly it's one of the silliest theories that's out there. So they found at the site though, they found a lot of these dolerites are harder stone than granite. You will eventually grind away and remove some granite if you pound away hard enough. And again, studies have been done on kind of the removal rate of stone using dolerite pounders. And I cover it in one of my videos about the quarry. There's a lot that doesn't make sense when it comes to this particular quarry, and in fact, if I take a look at where's the Gyges quarry stuff, I have videos here. I'm sure I've got. Okay, so you can see a number of different quarrying techniques in play at the Aswan quarry. The oldest being.
Now, how far is that obelisk from the Giza Plateau?
About 500 miles.
Okay.
So that's generally the. So this is like the general characteristical layout of it. You see these scoop marks all over the place, right? They're all on the floor where they've been used to move stuff. You see those other forms of quarrying too. In higher layers, you'll see chiseling and you'll see wedge and chisel, but you also have these test pits. Now, this is probably not the best example, but so these test pits that go down, some of them 30, 40 feet, they're like cut straight down into the stone. They're like a, I don't know if I have a better example here. Most of my stuff on this is video. But, here's one. So here you go. So see, this is like we had to put a grate over the top of this. And this is done using those scoop marks as well, which sort of starts to belie the challenge. Like, how do you get in there and pound, crouch down, and it's barely wide enough or broad enough for a person to stand in there, let alone get down on there, crouch down and pound it on the floor and then remove the material out. These go straight down, and what they're probably for is they're probably for testing the quality.
It's laggy.
Right?
When
you're looking
man?
for a giant single piece of granite, you're not going to find that at the surface
Ooh.
of any granite outcrop, because the granite's it's inferior up there. It's going to have cracks. It's going to have defects. When you cut down into the core of these quarries, this is where the highest quality stone is. It's got the large quartz crystal inclusions, and that's where you can find stone of a quality good enough to cut like a single piece block that isn't going to break on you.
Right.
So these test pits would have been dug looking for like how deep do we have to go to get these blocks out, which opens up a whole bunch of other problems, because a lot of Egyptologists don't credit the Old Kingdom Egyptians with the ability to quarry granite. It's sort of ridiculous. And you see tons of. This is more of a test pit here. These are really cool. You can see how it was done.
Good God, dude.
Yeah, it's the quarry is really, really interesting. Here's some good scoop marks, actually. This is you start to see stuff. So in some areas, there's really interesting particular block. I probably have it here. Do I? Okay, this is probably the best indication of it. So it's tough to see. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
So there's an unfinished piece that's not the big one, but there's one on the side. And so it's sort of cut out. And it goes in underneath. It goes in underneath the.
What's your wildest guess on when this was all done?
Oh, so I think some of the stuff is done. Wildest guess is. I mean, I would open up the range from 50,000. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily just before the Younger Dryas cataclysm, put it that way. Like, it's a possibility that the civilization that might have done some of this might have been ended by the Younger Dryas. But I actually think, given the extension of the human timeline, given the possibility that it may not have been just us, it might have been other species of hominids potentially involved, I don't know. I open up that window to like potentially hundreds of thousands of years.
What do you mean other species of hominids?
Well, Denisovans, Neanderthals, we have a complex genetic history. So us ourselves, our species is now out potentially 800, 900,000 years old. That's based on teeth morphology, studies into teeth morphology, studies into like when we split from a common ancestor with the Neanderthals, like our DNA train. From a fossil record, where the oldest human remains are like 300,000 years old, but a couple of recent studies looking at the rates of dental evolution and our DNA put the window much further, like towards 1 million years, but 800,000, 900,000 years. We're also finding that our history is more complex. We have, the discovery of the Denisovans or the Denisovans is a fairly recent thing that gets a whole other species of hominid. And there's some evidence of tool use and even sophisticated tool use. There's a jade bracelet that is a Denisovan artifact that has drill holes in it. And the one other thing that I've learned recently that I always thought that like Neanderthals couldn't talk. Like that was, I always thought, our studies and what we found of Neanderthals, the larynx and the structure of their throat meant that they couldn't talk. I think that's recently been reversed. I think now there's evidence that they could in fact talk. And we don't know anything about the Denisovans. We literally have a couple bones that we're working from, like a pinky bone.
Oh, come on, why?
So we don't
Like,
know.
I hate this frigging game,
kind of
man.
need speech to organise and for civilization.
Yeah.
At least we do it verbally. I mean, Graham Hancock might argue that maybe some of their methods of communications might have been some other mechanism. So it just, again, in speculation, I don't rule out, when you consider the concept of a lost ancient civilization, I'm not saying aliens, but I think it could certainly have involved other types of humans. We've got all the elongated skulls as well in South America. That's a real interesting phenomena. Graham I've heard him talk about the fact that some of those people, that they may have had other faculties that created or achieved some of this stonework. I prefer.
What does he say about that?
Well, he gets attacked for this endlessly, but he says that it's possible that they achieved some of the things they did through other mental faculties, not just telepathy, but telekinesis and stuff like that. I mean, there's stories that just seem to go along those lines. I prefer to take the technological angle, just given that we have the evidence for some of the tools and powerful tools being used and achievements being made, like these 1,000+ ton statues. I mean, God, I think I was telling you at dinner last night that there's a quarry in Egypt that had they disconnected that one limestone block, it would have been 5,000 tons.
Right.
There's stuff up to that scale that seems like they were working on, and it's crazy that at the Minya quarry. But so I don't rule out the possibility for a lost ancient civilization that it could have involved other species of hominids. Like we're the last humans left. Right? There were other humans. We killed off the rest of them. We're the last humans left.
Are you aware of the evidence? I'm really fuzzy on this, but there's some sort of evidence that was found that basically says that our DNA or the telomere on our DNA, the telomeres have been like capped, or something happened where there's evidence that like a pre-civilization could have possibly had a lifespan that was like 10 times our lifespan or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some really interesting.
It was like a very stark difference between our DNA and the DNA that was found in, what was it compared to? The DNA in what?
Probably in chimps and
chimps, yeah.
And other our closest relatives. Well, so I'm not 100% familiar with the telomere thing. I've heard that, but I've always been fascinated by the work of guys like Lloyd Pye.
Lloyd Pye, that's the guy. That's how I heard about this.
Yeah, so Lloyd Pye is interesting. He has a great lecture online called "Everything You Think You Know Is Wrong." He was probably more well known for being the keeper of the Star Child skull, which is this interesting artifact. But he was genuinely interested also.
Star Child.
No, that's a whole other rabbit hole.
Okay,
right?
Let's keep going. Let's not get you off track.
It's interesting, but he was interested in human origins and human evolution as well. He wrote a book called Everything You Think You Know Is Wrong. And I will say that he does do the whole Anunnaki thing. Like he does go down the route of what's his name? Who wrote 10th Planet? Sitchin. Zachariah Sitchin. So this is he sort of follows that. But I mean, I don't think Sitchin is correct, and I'm not really a believer in the Anunnaki stuff. But
Oh, really?
no, I think Sitchin was kind of pretty comprehensively kind of debunked with how he translated his deliberate mistranslations, and it's a long story with Sitchin. But not to say that you can look like that possibility isn't ruled out. The work that Lloyd Pye did made it interesting from a perspective of a potential intervention theory, which means that he was sort of hinting at the fact that we might have been genetically engineered as a species. And there's some evidence that, at least from he was looking at the evidence to support that. I think we have. I might get this wrong. we have a different number of chromosomes,
Right.
than other species, than our closest relatives.
Right.
And when you look at the DNA structures, it almost looks like we've been engineered, they've been tied together and kind of engineered that way. There's a few genetic oddities about our species that Lloyd Pye was suggesting might be indications that we've been engineered. So it gets into that in detail. I'm not an expert. It's been a long time since I've read the book.
And this flies in the face of evolution. Like
It does in a lot of ways, but there are sort of other examples. I don't know if it's horses or something like that that have a similar chromosomal difference. It's not the only thing he points at. Like we're a weird kind of species with some of the diseases that we have. I mean, he talks about the fact that we're like one of the only species that dies of exposure. Like it's like we're not well engineered for the planet.
Right.
You ever seen a dog just looks at the sun? Like its eyeballs.
That's
they just
sick.
look at the sun.
That's a
Like,
sick
don't look
one.
at the nuclear explosion. You'll go blind. No, they're fine. We go blind if we look at the sun. We don't have very good night vision. We die from exposure if we're left out, without clothing and shelter and all those sort of things.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of really weird genetic diseases that other species don't seem to suffer from. I mean, there's even some deficiencies in our genome that
We're so far away from every other wild animal. It's insane.
it is. Well, and that's always been true. I mean, the missing gap idea is you'd actually need like a dozen missing links, or the missing link. The idea that there's a missing link in the chain of evolution to get to humans, and you'd need more than one. Like to go from our nearest ancestors and Neanderthals to us is a huge jump. I mean, and it's actually, he points out that in a lot of cases that gets obfuscated by the way they lay out skeletons, like by making the skeletons of Neanderthals look more humanoid in terms of they space out the neck and they don't show it like it was where they had no neck and their shoulders were kind of much closer to their head. There's huge genetic and evolution gaps between us and our nearest relatives. Not, in a number of different areas. So he gets into that, and it's an interesting idea. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it one way or the other. I do rate the whole intervention theory as a possibility. So either the OG intervention theory, which is life itself, panspermia, like DNA itself coming to this world by intervention, or by just panspermia as an accident. Like comets could well be the progenitors of life in the universe. Like the fact we're learning more and more about the fact that there's, the amino acids and the building blocks of life could be contained in cometary material in those icy cores, or even if they're radioactive, they could be liquid cores. Liquid water could be carried by these things, which could contain the building blocks of life. And it's really interesting to think that, this is the mystery that's at the origin of life altogether. And, we're definitely creatures of this planet too, I'd say that. Like we trace our DNA, we're part of the tree of life of this planet. But it's the one, as far as evolution's gone, from single cell organisms through the dinosaurs to us, the one part of that that's never kind of changed, that's never evolved, is DNA itself. So the way that life gets expressed as a technology, the DNA, that's never really changed. Like DNA as a technology has not changed. It's changed its expression. Like it's the forms and the life that it creates has changed. And there's a real mystery at the point of origin of life, like how DNA came to be. You know, this is an ongoing field of research. There are people trying to figure this out. Can you know, I mean, I personally think it's quite unlikely that it was a bunch of, you know, proteins and amino acids and some warm water that got hit by lightning and boom, there's DNA. It's a very complex structure.
Yes.
And even by saying that, oh, okay, so life might have been seeded on this planet, either like Prometheus style, where the aliens came and said, sprinkled some DNA in the river and away we go, or it just arrived on a planet from somewhere else. All you're really doing is kicking the can down the road. Like, it still had to start somewhere. But it's a possibility. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if panspermia was the origin of life on this planet. Could have been another civilization. I don't know. And I think there's some interesting lines of evidence and interesting thinking from people about the idea that it could have been a more direct intervention into evolution later on in time. I'm not saying I believe that. I just think it's interesting. And it's tough to rule out some of those possibilities based on it.
Especially when you look at some of the stuff that we're looking at here and the stuff that you've discovered.
Oh.
I mean, I think with beyond a shadow of a doubt that we have proved that you and people like you have proved that we're not coming from off of a linear timeline.
No.
Of
I would agree.
at least technologically.
Yeah, I would agree. So let's see if I can show this to you. It's hard to see. I wish I had these photos. Maybe I can pull up a video or something, but.
Which one? So is this? Are you looking at? Is you looking at that new 5 million or 5,000 ton obelisk? Is that?
No, no. If you want to see that, I do have a picture of that. I would just say that I would finish off the quarry discussion by saying that with the scoop marks, the one other thing I'd just like to point out to people is that, you know, these are regular lines. You actually see it here. It's not a bad example. They start, like these scoop marks start and they're consistent and linear and they go all the way down and they actually go up and underneath this stone. So this stone's being quarried out, the one in the foreground here. And they go all the way up and under. So it's like this one continuous tool mark. I have a long video on the scoop marks that gets into the details of why this isn't, the pounding stone hypothesis isn't a plausible example. And I think it's telling also that if you look at the quarrying methods that they will show you in the quarry, okay, there's pounding stones, which is literally with a stone or rubbing on it with a stone. And then you go up in sophistication to the wedge and chisel approach that I talked about, where you're hammering wood into, like you make these grooves and you hammer wood in. And then the other example is, well, you actually have straight chiseling, where it's later in time and you've got hardened steel, you've got long steel chisels and you're banging it in and you're just like carving the rock and then splitting it.
Yeah.
So you can think of that as a sophistication goes up. But what they're extracting and the stones that they're taking out is the absolute opposite. They're using those other methods to take smaller pieces and little pieces off the sides of things. But that pounding stone method, the most primitive one, is also the one supposedly responsible for the biggest goddamn pieces you can find. Like, it doesn't make any sense that the most primitive technology is the one supposedly responsible for the 1,000-ton artifacts, and there's a good example of how old that is. If I go back up to my podcast images, we go back to the quarry, is in this area here, right? So this is what's known as the harbour in the quarry. You can't normally get in here. I don't know. One time we wandered down here and we were in here, and supposedly this is where they would park the boats, and they call this the harbour. And it's not a harbour. To me, what you're looking at is the remnants of a trench for a giant object, right? So look at this thing. So this is a piece of stone that was probably extracted from here. You see the scoop marks along the side. I think it's as big, if not bigger, than the unfinished obelisk. And it's in this lower area. I'm standing there, and it's called the harbour now. But I think you're looking at what is left after they've taken something out using this scooping technique. What's interesting about it is that it's got painting on it. It's got all these
Why? Come on, man.
depictions of ostriches, or some people say they're flamingos, and there's all this painting on it. And what gets even more interesting about that stuff is when you look at this style of this artwork that's on this area. You see it keeps going down here, and all of these walls are gone. The closer wall to us has been quarried out entirely, but this was a big trench, and this huge piece of stone was removed. That type of artwork, and I've got many more examples than just this, it matches this stuff. Now, this stuff is a style of painting and artwork that is very much associated with pre-dynastic times, right? So like before the dynastic civilization ever started, the artwork that's on the wall in that quarry matches the pottery and diagrams and drawings that we see on pottery vessels that come from pre-dynastic times, that have been found in pre-dynastic burials. So what this infers to me is that artwork done in that quarry was probably done in pre-dynastic times. It was done using the same art style. They used a much different art style. There's other carvings in the quarry where the Egyptians did their thing, you know, the more dynastic, typical kind of hieroglyphic and artwork. This red ochre paint with the style of carving, these birds on this thing match the birds in that. There's a bunch of other examples of it. It means that it was done in pre-dynastic times, which also tells you that it was done on the wall that was left after they'd pulled that block out. So you had to have pulled that block out first to even expose that wall,
Right.
and then it gets painted on. So how long ago did they pull that block out? And yeah, it's crazy. Good God. So I just wanted to make that point about the quarry.
Yeah.
And I do have a video that dives into that giant block that's been extracted there and the connection to the artwork.
Let's talk about the vases. There's a lot of new shit going on with the vases that you've been looking at.
There is.
What we talked a lot about the vases on the first podcast we did, and the incredible symmetry involved in making those vases, and the fact that they're extremely thin. You can shine a light into them, and you can see through them. They're so goddamn thin, and they're made out of some of the hardest rocks.
That's right.
On Earth. And they still say that these vases were made during those times with chisels and pounding stones and all that stuff, right?
Yeah,
even after you come out with some of your videos and some of this stuff, no one's acknowledged it officially.
Right. Yeah. I mean, nobody's looked at nobody's really said that. That the hypothesis for how they were made, at least in the mainstream, has remained the same, which is, it was people rubbing on them with rocks and banging on them with flint, stuff like that. So made by hand. And again, to speed run the vases, it's like they go back to well and truly pre-dynastic times. In some cases, there's evidence of them going back to burials as far as 14,500 years ago. Right through pre-dynastic times, and then they've been found in times, basically during the Old Kingdom, up to about the 4th and 5th dynasty, most of them. The majority of them were found beneath the Step Pyramid, like 40,000 or 50,000 of them, which is a 3rd dynasty structure. Then they kind of peter out after that. Like there's a few examples of vases that come from later periods, but we identify them as coming from those periods because they have very poorly scratched hieroglyphs on them. I mean, we talked about that earlier. But these are incredible class and category of artifacts, like made from all sorts of exotic types of stone. Like you said, we talked about them before. Perfect symmetry, extremely thin. Petrie found one that went down to 1/40th of an inch, which is I think the quote that I've got here from him. One of the other things I always like to point out is that they are often found. We talked about imitation earlier.
Painting them.
This is where you would find them, and they're ascribed to the same person because they're found in the same burial. But you have a hardstone vase here next to a hand-formed pottery vase that is painted to look like granite, and not even this is not a turned vase. This is hand-formed.
Right.
So a lot of people, even when you get into the details of arguing about this, the people are like, okay, they made them on a lathe, but it was just a simple lathe, because the idea that you're turning this stone to get these results.
Right. I'm
like, okay, so if they had lathes, why didn't they have the pottery wheel? The pottery wheel was a much simpler application of the wheel than a lathe is. But it's just a facetious sort of argument to suggest that these came from the same people. I think they're inherited and they're old. But what's happened, and there's lots of evidence, they go way back into time, lots of them discovered, they were inscribed. They were definitely reused and inherited. There's a depiction of how they were made that was found at Saqqara. This is what they used to basically say, this is how they were made. It's basically like bent sticks with weights on the side and flint tips.
This guy's got his hand in the middle of it.
Yeah, he's rubbing at it with a hand. But what they're showing you here is the vase making industry that happened after the 3rd dynasty.
Right.
It's the alabaster vases. It's just white calcite. It's a 3 on the Mohs scale. It's much softer, and we have lots and lots of examples of beautiful alabaster vase work. But it's very simple. It's not simple. It's artful. It's not precise. You don't see the same symmetry. They're off balance. They don't they don't have the same properties as the very hard stone vases that seem to come from earlier times. So what's happened though since I talked to you last was that we've finally been able to take this analysis to a new level. Like we've finally been able to get our hands on what is a privately owned pre-dynastic rose granite vase and subject it to structured light scanning. This was the first step we've taken. This happened at the start of this year of 23, and we've since we've come a long way since then. And structured light scanning is a process where you're basically 3D scanning it with lasers, and you can basically create a model of the artifact down to about the accuracy of about 1,000th of an inch. So take an inch, divide it up into 1,000 pieces. A human hair is between 2 and 3 thousandths of an inch thick. A sheet of printer paper, maybe 5 or 6, something like that, thousandths thick. So where accuracy is down to less than half the width of a human hair. So it creates an extremely accurate model of the vase. Now, once you've got that model, you can start to do some interesting analysis on it. You can start to look at, okay, how precisely was this thing made? And that's exactly what we did. So this is the vase. It's actually only about yay tall. It's like 6 inches tall, maybe, a little tiny thing. And that's it being scanned. And once we did that, there were a couple of professional metrologists, and these guys work in the aerospace industry. They make parts for jet engines and turbines and the space rocket ship stuff. These are professional engineers that they're professional metrologists, and metrology being the study of the science of measurement. So in those fields, you have to you use these techniques a lot in those fields, and it's very important, right? We want to make things precisely, and this is a good example of precision enabling and function. It's like turbine blade manufacture and stuff like that, like efficiency of jet engines, all that sort of stuff. These guys work for one of those companies, and this is what they do on a day-to-day basis. So they analyzed the scan and they ran it through a coordinate measurement system, and what they found was just astonishing. Like the results and looking at just how precisely this thing was made, absolutely astonishing. And in particular, it's not just the precise nature of the surfaces themselves, but it's the interrelation of one surface to another. So, making the different parts of the vase be perpendicular or parallel or perfectly aligned with other parts of it. So the way this works, it's fairly complex, but we can sort of step through it. The first thing to note is the vase itself is an ellipsoid. You can't match it to a regular geometric shape. Right? It's not a circle, it's not a sphere, it's not a cone, it's an ellipsoid. And what you want to be able to do is match geometric shapes or regular shapes to parts of the vase, so that then you can do geometry on them. You can calculate center lines and center points and the how perpendicular or parallel are they to other parts of the vase. So things like this. So we essentially start by creating an XYZ three-dimensional grid, which helps us derive things like center lines, axes, and then we can start to compare the other parts of the vase. So the way you do this in a CMM system is you match geometric shapes to parts of the vase. Now, you could do that with you could say like, all right, we're going to match a flat plane to the top of the vase, the lid, and we're going to use 5 points to do it. It's not going to be very accurate. It's not going to represent that surface very well. But if you do it with thousands and thousands of points, the more points you use of reference, the more accurately it's representing that surface. So you'll see in these slides the fact that we're using thousands and thousands of points. So in this example, there's nearly 4,000 points of reference has been used to match a flat plane to the top of to the vase lip, to the top surface, and then the measurement we're doing is like how close to perfectly flat is this? It's within 3 thousandths of an inch. So it's very flat. Like that flat, the flatness of that surface is within 3 thousandths of an inch of being perfectly flat, basically. So very close, very, very accurate.
Around the width of a piece of hair.
Yeah. That's just the top. So then you can go further from that. Now we can look at, all right, let's look at the vase mouth. So this is that round part on the inside of the neck of the vase, if you like. And so what we're doing here is we're measuring it with a cylinder. So you can see that on the left of the vase mouth there, there's a little cylinder icon, and we're using like 10,500 points to match it, which is a lot. I mean, this actually has got some damage on the inside of the neck too, this vase. And we can match it looking at the cylindricity, so how perfectly cylindrical is that? It's within 13 thousandths of an inch of being cylindrical. But now that I'll speed up a bit on this, because now that we've got that top surface, you can think of that as like an x-axis.
Right.
And if you think of a cylinder sitting in the neck of this vase, we can now, because we've matched the cylinder to the surface, we can say, okay, how perpendicular is that cylinder to the top surface that we just managed? And we call that, like the top surface is control surface A. right? So you can see like the perpendicular measurement. How perpendicular is it to control surface A? And it's within it's 1/1000th of an inch.
1/1000.
Yes, so it's basically perfectly perpendicular to the top surface. Now, top surface is A, and now we've got this vase neck, the cylinder in the vase neck, and the center line of that vase neck. We can call that the axis of the vase, and we can call that control surface B. So now we can measure every other part of the vase relative to the top and the neck, and that's what we do. So we go on to measure like, all right, you can match a sphere to the lower part of the vase body. And we did that using like nearly 80,000 points of reference, so it's really accurate. And then what you can do is you can, with that sphere, this is worth talking about for a minute. This is the highest number we saw in the whole report. It's 17,000ths of an inch. So the center point of that sphere is basically within 17,000ths of an inch from the center line of the vase. So it's like a couple sheets of printer paper basically away from it. Now, it seems like a big number relative to the other numbers, but what this is telling you a lot more than just like how close is that center line of the sphere. What spheres are interesting, like if you took a sphere and you deformed it at all, like small on the bottom or you pushed it or whatever, it's going to shift that center point dramatically, right? Mm-hmm. So what this is telling you is not only is this 17,000ths is no joke, like that's extremely close. The exact center point of that sphere is really close to that center line of the vase. But it's also telling you just how regular that shape is. Because if it wasn't regular and that part of the vase that matches the sphere, if that was at all deformed, it would shift that center point all over the place. So it's telling you that it's not only is this very close to the center line, extremely close, it's almost perfectly spherical in this section. So it's a section of a sphere, that blue line, right? That's the matching of a sphere. It's very, very regular. It's regular to the point where you couldn't possibly achieve it with hand tools, by hand or by eye. Like, because you imagine you're carving on that. And again, they don't credit the Old Kingdom, or certainly not pre-dynastic times, with the use of the lathe. But even if they had a lathe, and even if you're using like a tool rest and you're trying to do this by hand, you're going to be a million miles away from this result. This is genuinely not achievable by hand. Right. This incredibly regular shape. It's a phenomenal achievement, and even though that's the biggest number you see in this report, this represents something that would require some of the very best machinery we have today to replicate, even in other materials like acrylic or stainless steel or aluminium. And this is in rose granite, which isn't a regular material, right? The hardness changes microscopically as it goes through the material. We get other results. With same thing. We're matching a cone at this point to the vase bottom, and this is the other end of the vase from the top and the center line, and we're within 5,000ths of an inch of being perfectly perpendicular with the top. We're within 9,000ths of an inch of being perfectly parallel with the center line, using 60,000 points of reference. Like it's infinitesimal. It's so ridiculously well made. It's not is what we're seeing with this, right? So. It gets interesting here even with the lug handles, and this gets into some of the details around how this might have been made, because you can imagine like turning this on a lathe, you can't really do the lug handles, right?
Right, exactly.
If this thing had lugs on it and you were spinning it this way, you can't, and you're cutting it as it's spinning, you can't really create the lug handles.
Yeah. They add those after in modern.
Well, yeah, you'd have to. Well, these aren't added;
they're a part of one piece.
They're part of one piece.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you'd probably have to leave a bull nose and come back with a different procedure to make them. But we can do things like compare the match a cylinder to the lug handles, compare them to A and B, which we're doing here, and we're within 1,000ths of an inch, like 1 and 3,000ths of an inch. So incredibly accurate relative to these axes of measurement that we're taking. And then we can compare them to each other. We can create we can make one of these called reference surface F, and we can measure the other lug handle relative to it. And again, we're within, 5 or 6, or I think it's 7,000ths of an inch of being perfectly aligned, parallel with the other lug handle. Not only that, but it's like the tops of them. Like there's actually a video of us spinning this thing on a surface and having like one of these precision tolerance gauges that measures in the thousandths of an inch, and you sort of zero it out on one lug handle, and you spin it around and it just zeroes out on top of the other lug handle. Like they're perfectly the same height on the thing. And that also speaks to the flatness of the bottom, because it's turning relative to the flatness of the bottom of the vase, which we didn't measure, but that's the fact that you're zeroing out this gauge. It's in some of the videos. It's manufacturers and it's hard to explain, and machinists and people that understand these sort of measurements will understand it better, but they'll get it. But it's interesting to think, all right, so assuming you've left a bull nose, right, to create these lug handles. You have to come back with a different tool, and you've got to carve away that area of the vase body between the lug handles. So what about that part of the vase? Because they can't be made on a lathe. It has to be made with a different process, right? And so we looked at that. We looked at the actual area of the vase between the two handles, and we found the same level of precision. And this is truly remarkable. It's 20,000 points of reference. We looked at we matched a cone to look at how close is the center line to the center line of B, like that center line of the neck of the vase. It's within 0.005 of an inch. This is really remarkable because in today's manufacturing processes, when you change tools or you change the process, it introduces errors. Like this is accounted for in our modern manufacturing processes, things like making turbine blades and stuff like that. We understand that tools and process changes introduces errors, and we don't see that sort of error here. We're not seeing. So it leads you to one of two conclusions. One, whoever made this was able to handle tool and process changes better than we can, right? So they could deal with changing the process and the tool and just not have the same degree of error that we'd see. Or it wasn't made on a lathe. It was made in a single pass, which means that you're talking about 5 axes of freedom. It's a mill. So think about those CNC mills as computerized mills that can carve like a complex object with one tool tip. It's one of those two things. It has to either be
like 3D printing.
Not print. As far as we know, this is reductive.
Right.
As in we're like taking it and carving it away.
Right. Okay. Yes. Obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. Geopolymer. The idea.
I don't mean. Yeah. Right. That doesn't make sense.
Like print, but think about like a CNC mill. Like a complex 5 axes of freedom with an arm.
Yes.
That's computer guided. Like that's one of those two things that comes out of this analysis, and it's the fact that there's no perceivable lack of precision between the vase handles is amazing. So. And this is just the start of the rabbit hole kind of thing. Like it got crazy from here. This is a lot of fun because we made the STL file, like the model, available online, and sort of open sourced it. And there was a cryptographer from Denmark named Mark Kvist who runs this website called unsigned.io. Really interesting guy. I've spoken to him, and he undertook essentially a deep sort of mathematical and geometric analysis of the vase, and he found some just utterly remarkable aspects of it that I think have some extremely startling conclusions. And he kind of started by looking for like, all right, are there geometric patterns that we can see in this vase? So what can we see in it? And so, he kind of started and he found that it actually does encompass some of the sacred geometry that we were talking about with Randall the other day. That things like the circle of life. There's actually 2 circle of life grids that are in here, and you can see them this way. So if you look at the blue circles that measure at point D, that's a grid based on the maximum internal diameter of the vase, and you can also see that grid matches the very top of the vase with the point A. So it's a circle of life grid that matches the internal diameter, it matches the top of the vase, and then you have another circle of life grid that matches that's based on the external maximum diameter of the vase that also matches other points of it. And this is kind of where he started, and he found that it created, not only were these geometric patterns in it, but there's a bunch of these mathematically significant ratios and even algorithms and interrelationships between the shapes in the vase, to the point where you could define it with a single algorithm. And the overall point here is he's proving that this vase was designed. Like these degrees of interrelationship between these features in the vase aren't accidental. It had to have been designed and then somehow executed in granite with just astonishing precision. so one of the base principles that he found, he's taken the object, he's reverse engineering. Like we're looking at it, and he's trying to find out what was used, what is the philosophy, mechanism, mathematics behind this vase. And the more you dig, the more you find. So one of the fundamental principles he found
I didn't know what to do anyways.
in the vase is the
died
use of the
anyways.
radian, particularly the 1 radian angle. So this is a little diagram showing you what a radian is. It's a simple way to express any angle, right? You take the radius of a circle, you apply it to the circumference of a circle, the angle that it forms when you draw lines to it on the inside is 1 radian. So if there's a 2, you could call something a 2 radian angle. Half a circle is pi radians or 3.14, etc. radians.
Right.
And there are 2 pi radians inside of a circle. So it's like just an elegant way to describe any angle. Mm-hmm. And you can see the use of the 1 radian angle expressed here. So the 1 radian angle kind of defines the curvature and the angle of the top of the vase. It based on that circle of life grid center point, you can see the 1 radian angles kind of defining the placement of the handles. There's a number of different uses of the 1 radian angle. And from that, he discovered something else. He discovered that not only are there radians in this thing, but the radian is the basis for an algorithm that can be used to describe all of the curvatures used in the vase. Now, this gets a little. You don't have to understand the maths to understand the significance of this. The most widely used shape in the vase is the circle. Like sections of circles are used to describe the curves on the vase, the little tiny curves on the insides of corners and stuff like that. Now, the radius of these circles, so the size of these circles, is very tightly interrelated with each other. And it's only these radiuses, like there's none of the size of these circles are accidental. They're all tightly related to each other, and they can be expressed with a single elegant equation that Mark was calling the radial traversal pattern. And that's the equation right there. But what this is telling you is that if there were circles or curves of a different radius, of a radius, there's nothing here that doesn't fit this pattern. So it's only the circles of this size that fit this pattern. It's based on, it uses radians, but it fits this radial traversal pattern, right? So you can see it's up to there's 14 different, or 12 or 14 different circle radiuses radii that he used. They're all related to each other. They're connected to each other through this algorithm.
There's that 432.
432 is here as well. And so this is the point to take home is that this isn't accidental. You might be able to find 1 or 2 degrees of mathematical interrelationship in an object by accident, but to find 12 tightly coupled degrees of mathematical interrelationship in an object like this is not accidental. Mark actually said in the article, it said it'd be more likely for you to wake up one morning and have an entire new universe, like quantum universe, sprouting out of your left nostril than it would be for this to be an accident. It's not accidental. It was designed. And in order to prove this, he went ahead and said, well, you know what? Let's make a model. We're going to go into CAD. We're going to build this vase using just this algorithm, using these circles with this algorithm, make it perfect. And then I'm going to compare the vase model to the CAD model that's built using just the math. And he did that, and the median radial deviation, so the difference from the actual model of the scanned vase to the model he built using the maths, was 9 micrometers, which is 0.3 of a thousandth of an inch. Like that's the average deviation.
0.3
of a thousand. So like it's 3 10,000ths of an inch. Which is, at that point, we're talking about degrees where we don't know if it's an imperfection in the scan,
right,
or even in the vase itself. You can't tell.
Yes.
You're at the limit of resolution at this.
So we can measure it.
Yeah, so you got to also remember here that some of these circles we're talking about, they range from about 42 millimeters in size down to 1.1 millimeter at the small end. So you have arcs of circles that fit this pattern that are 1.1 millimeters in radius, which is kind of crazy, right? Very small.
What was Randall saying when you pulled this up the other day? He was like kind of freaking out.
He was. I don't think he's watched all of the videos. I'd love him to see. I want to talk. I haven't had the chance to take him through it yet, and I'll probably do that in Montana here. But
he was kind of losing his mind when he saw this, because he saw something very similar with the radiuses of these circles compared to some of this plasmoid technology that he was talking about.
Yeah, and I think he would. This other stuff was interesting too. The fact that other than the radial traversal pattern, we also see pi, golden ratio. We see other sacred geometry put in here. So the image on the left shows you pi to within 0.1 of a degree. The image on the right shows us the golden ratio squared to within less than 0.1%. I'm sorry, not degree, percent. Less than 0.01% accuracy with the golden ratio. There's actually, the golden ratio shows up in a number of places. I've just used a couple of examples here. It also has encodes pi to within, 0.1%.
Can you explain what the golden ratio is for people who might not know?
So people don't know, golden ratio is the aspect or the ratio of the universe. The golden ratio is a fundamental principle of the world. Like it seems to be an encoded ratio that it's encoded from DNA up to the formation of galaxies. It's 1.6, etc. I can't actually remember exactly what it is, but it's the ratio expressed by living things. It also can be found by basic geometry. We went through it with the Randall Carlson podcast about how to define the ratio, but it can be expressed in the human body in terms of how it grows from the length of your hand down to the gap in the gap in your wrist here, and that's one part of the ratio. The other part of it is down to here. It's the ratio is a line that is dissected, where the ratio of the small to the large is exactly the same as the large to the whole, right? So it's hard to think about, but it's like take a line, the point where you dissect it, where the ratio of size is of the small piece where you've dissected it, the ratio of that to the larger piece is exactly the same as the ratio of the larger piece to the whole. So it's like A and B, B to A is to A plus B. That's the equation for it. Right. And it's expressed in life, right? Everything that grows, organic material, the human body, conch shells is the famous one. It's the Fibonacci sequence is attached to this. It's, you take a cross-section of a DNA molecule, you find the golden ratio. It's in the spiral helix of the DNA molecule. It's in the structure of galaxies. It seems to be a fundamental constant of the universe. And that's why I think the fact that it gets expressed in these artifacts, and in fact, this sort of geometry, even radians themselves, they're showing us, the builders of this are showing us that there's a language behind this. They're showing us their capabilities. This vase to me, represents something of almost like a time capsule. It's like something that's sent through time to us that is expressing the degree of knowledge and understanding that its creators had of the universe and of their system, even their system of mathematics. I have a slide on this later, but there was I want to finish talking about the vase because there's some interesting implications about the maths that we've been going through. I'm not doing it just for the sake of maths, but come back to that time capsule idea in a minute. But so when you think about the design of the vase and how it's been made very precisely in rose granite, and there's a mathematical design that's behind it, right? We get to a point where we're like, all right, so the precision, the complexity, the depth of interrelation between the features really rules out random chance. This artifact was 100% design. And it's like, okay, so how could you design this? Can you design it on paper? Remember that there are circles that have a radius of 1 millimeter, basically. Imagine if you're trying to draw that at scale. I'd challenge anyone to try and draw a circle with a compass that's got a radius of 1 millimeter and see how you go. And then be able to execute that down to the thousandths of an inch. Remember, it's made extremely precisely. You might be able to draw it out on a piece of paper that's as big as the room, but then you still have to scale it down somehow. It's got to find its way to an output somehow. You've got to be able to carve this thing in granite somehow. I think the best way, and Mark proved that the best way to design this is mathematically. Right? It's designed with the maths. We can express it with an equation. Once you've got that equation, you've got that mathematical design, you have to then do the same thing. You've got to get it to output somehow. So how do you take it from a design to an output, and into an output of a system that is extremely accurate? Like this, just be able to make something like this in rose granite would require some of our very best precision lathes or precision mills, and you're talking about extremely sturdy and firm bearings and rods and turn screws, and
Who hit me?
there's a whole lot of capability
What?
in this, right?
Dumb,
It's
man.
been made with astonishing precision, and the fact that we know that because of the area between the vase handles, right?
I think I'm done
It's
for
extremely
tonight.
precise. Like they didn't lose positional calibration when they changed tools to make the vase handle, or it was made on a 5-axis mill in a single pass. And this is kind of where that evidence and logic all leads. And I like to use this. I like to quote directly from Mark's article where he wrote about this, and this is what he said. Quoting Mark, as far as we know, no human beings, trained animals, or naturally occurring phenomena, modern or ancient, take mathematical formulae and equations as input and produce lathe operating motions as outputs. For all the knowledge and insights we've accumulated over the ages, we know of exactly one and only one category of things capable of such behavior. The kind of thing that we refer to as a Turing machine, a device capable of taking input, holding state, performing operations on held states, according to predetermined principles, and producing output. Now you can make Turing machines mechanically, pneumatically, electronically,
Alright, last one of the
hydraulically,
night.
but we call this class of device a computer, and no plausible way of representing,
really didn't
operating
mean to
on,
do-
or manufacturing the design of this
What,
artifact
really?
exists
I didn't
without
pass away,
having
did I?
access to one such.
Did I? I did.
He's saying that you cannot have made this without the use of a Turing machine,
Hate this
aka a
fucking game.
computer. Be able to take that design
Oh
and
my
produce
God.
the output to get the result that we see in this. It's a very interesting statement.
That's a mind fuck. That's what we like to call a mind fuck.
Yeah. Yeah, and it did fuck with the mind of one of these engineers that did the original analysis of it. Remember we talked about the metrology at the start, one of these aerospace engineer guys?
Yes.
So Mark does this. And this guy's name's Nick, and he called me up, and he's like, Mark puts out his article, and it took me, you got to read this article a few times and figure out the math and trying to really digest it and see what it means. And for me, this is validation. I'm like, this is magic. This is confirming some of the things that I've long suspected, and I've held this particular worldview for a while, that, all right, there was technology in the past. Nick, he was amazed by the metrology. He was like, this thing's incredibly precise, scratching his head, But it wasn't until he really sort of chewed on Mark's article, and he calls me up one day and he's like, dude, I have to talk to you about this. This thing it's keeping me up at night. It's like I wake up in a fucking sweat thinking about this vase, because it hit, you could tell it had kind of shattered his worldview. It had like changed. He's like, I can't explain this or rationalize it without this type of technology. What the hell was going on in the past? And he said something to me that I was like, I put into a slide here, which I thought was really interesting. And some of the things that I've said, that I think this artifact is much more than just a simple vase, right? It's encoding sacred geometry, which is the very fabric of the universe. And I think it's telling us a tale of the creator's capabilities, their elegance, their knowledge systems, right? Even their mathematical systems, like they might have a base radian system rather than a base 10 like we use, which is an elegant mathematical system. But what Nick said to me is like, you know what this reminds me of? He said it reminds me of the golden records that are on the Voyager space probes. Right? So when the space probes went out in the 1970s, they had these golden records on them, and it wasn't like we wrote this information on there. We used mathematical principles, geometric principles. We even used the radioactive decay of I think uranium atoms to provide a launch clock. We gave them all these clues based on different principles and maths on these vases to try and convey information about our species, about who we were, about what we knew. And we sent the goddamn things out into space. I think this vase, it seems to be something like that, but instead of going through space, it's been sent through time. It's like one of these golden records that's been sent through time to us, and if we have the eyes to see it and the ability to decode it, there's all this information that we can glean from it. We can learn something about the past from it. And that's what Nick was telling me. I was like, that's a fantastic analogy for it. And that's truly what it is. The deeper we look, the deeper this rabbit hole goes on this thing. And yeah, the crazy thing is too, this was the start of the year we did this, and we've been working through it, but it's not the only one.
You guys did more vases?
We're doing more vases. We have
Alright, this is the last one of the
literally
night.
20 or 30 more that
Thank
we're
you for
working
being
on
here.
now. Early results, we're seeing similar results for a lot of them, even better in terms of the pure metrology and precision. Like some of them are zeroing
you
it
for
out on like
being
the 1,000
you.
scale.
What?
We're also measuring stuff in CT machines now, which
Wow.
can go down to the micron. So even like, 25 times more accuracy than the structured light scanning. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. It's, yeah.
Whatever.
So this dude you were hanging out with the other day, he has like a ton of these vases. Do you have that? Can you show that picture
Yeah.
of you with all these vases? Is that the first time you put your hands on one of them?
It's the first time that I've here's me holding one here. This one actually is translucent. You can see through it.
The light.
Take a light through it. But this is the collection that some of his that we're working on. I've been extremely fortunate, and I do want to. I'm not going to name names, but I'm very grateful to people that have been inspired by this vase work, and they have the means and the ability to go out and collect these things like this, because these are artifacts that can be bought on the antiquities market, and they cost a bomb. Obviously, I can't do it. But I mean,
I really hate
grateful.
this stupid
Well, some of
game.
I mean, up to like $70,000, $80,000, $100,000.
Alright, thank you for being here. That was quite the
Some
rundown
of them as
on.
low as like a few $1,000s, but mostly
gotta
the good
change
ones.
the,
You're talking 5 figures, if not
The
6.
camera first.
And
But thank you for being here.
yeah, I'm very grateful too that they're willing to have them looked at and analyzed. Of course, the goal is
So fucking dumb.
to get into the museums and to look at some of those artifacts that are in there. We're working on, creating a standardized process that we can then propose to museums, and we have some very good interactions happening, and we're very hopeful that in the very near future we'll be able to get into some museums that do allow this type of research. They're willing to work with us. Petrie Museum being one of them. They've got a number of artifacts that would totally fit within this. I think this technology and this technique is not. We don't just have to use it on vases. I'd love to see it done. We want to scan those drill cores that we looked at earlier and really define that spiral groove. We want to be able to. I'd love to see this used on boxes and statues, and be able to really do complex geometric modeling and analysis for those things. So I think we're just on the tip of the iceberg when it comes to learning more about
The statues at
These
the
are-
Luxor, for example, those things were analyzed similar, not
Well-
obviously under those techniques, but Chris Dunn pointed out that those statues at the Luxor were perfectly symmetrical.
Yeah, perfectly symmetrical. Yeah, and the way we've done that is with photographic and photogrammetry. But even the smallest, like the sort of relatively small statues, 6-foot statues, I think we could scan down to this level of precision, and we can define just how precise they are, how regular the curves are. I think there's tremendous things we can learn with this technology, and I think that's exactly what I'd love.